Hello, hello. Welcome to another Tuesday Tea-ology. I hope that your week is off to a running start and that here in your busy schedule you will enjoy a few minutes stepping back from the ordinary things of life to think about the things of God. We've been talking about the attributes of God, the the wonderful descriptions that we can give to understand who God is in His majesty and His infinite glory. And we've been talking about some of these ways in which God exceeds creaturely limitations, that the dimensions that God has created for our existence are not therefore confining to Him. So, in particular, looked at His relation to space, that God is not confined in space the way we are. He's given us space so that the things that He's created can be different from each other and can interact with each other. God's not confined by time. He's given us time so that His creatures can do things, and so that there can be these sequences of events in which we live, and in which He interacts with us, even though He's not confined by time, nor is He held out of it. That's true of everything God has created as well. It does not confine Him, but it does not shut Him out. And so now we come to the matter of knowledge. Knowledge. This great field of how what is comes into our awareness and understanding. And we gain knowledge by various processes. There's a world out there, and this is, I mean, some of this just assumes a Christian worldview, Christian realism, that we philosophically hold to. And I think, I mean, even not understanding the Christian component, most people are philosophical realists because it's hard to do much by another view. It's the one that makes intuitive sense because it's true. But we believe there's a world. That world exists outside of us. This isn't all an illusion. This isn't all a dream. Um, I'm real and you're real, and the things around us are real. We may not understand them all, but they exist outside of us and we interact with them. And so knowledge is the process by which we come to be aware of and understand the things that are outside of us as well as ourselves. And we have mechanisms by which we do this. The key initial mechanism that you begin to work with right away is the sensory input. You sense things and you then begin to process them. You see things, you touch things, you smell things, you taste things. And we see this in little babies who are first coming to understand the world, that they are employing all of their basic sensory tools. And that's why they put everything in their mouth. They're discovering it. They're discovering the world. And you discover what things are like. Their physical characteristics is some of the first things you become aware of. but but at the same time, our relational, intuitional understanding is forming at the same time. Babies, are quickly becoming aware of what facial expressions mean, and getting attuned to that, and understanding the relationships, even if they couldn't. I mean, so far from putting it into words, even if they can't necessarily put it into coherent thoughts, they are developing a sort of understanding. But that non-sensory mechanism, the intellect, is also, of course, at work, and that's what we train more and more through education. That it's not just about sensory, but it's about categorizing things and coming to understand them, what they're made of, how they work, what they mean. And we come into a world not only of solid things per se, but also of symbols. The symbols of uh, not only the letters and words that we form, but also the various connotations that things have, and the messages that all kinds of things send. And it's enormously complicated. And we come to understand that there is a vast field of things to know, and that we will never grasp more than the tiniest little bit of it. You know, we divide knowledge into all these fields, uh, the human person and how we work and our relationships, history and the things that have happened in the past, what's likely to happen in the future, we might project, mathematics and the sciences, and how languages work, and all of the things that have been written and said, and the artifacts that have been created, works of art of various kinds, from paintings to sculptures to songs to movies and so on. All of this comprises an enormous field of knowledge, of which, we are only capable of grasping the tiniest part, just because one, because we just don't have time to get it all. We forget some of the things we do grasp, and in the end, some things may be just beyond our grasp. Our limits affect it. So there's the subject of knowledge generally. But what is God's relationship with knowledge? What is God's knowledge like? And the answer, which you've probably guessed or you probably knew already, is that just as God is not confined by time or by space, God is also not limited by the existence of other things. God's knowledge is not limited. God knows all things. God is omniscient. That's the big word, omni, meaning all, and the nescience there. So God is omniscient. He is all knowing. To take you to one passage of scripture in Psalm 147, verse 5. Great is our Lord and abundant in power. His understanding is beyond measure. So that verse begins with God's greatness, and then it goes into his enormous power, and then turns to his understanding with this sort of unqualified sense. His understanding is beyond measure. We may not be able to measure the understanding of a given person, but it could be measured if you could find the right metrics and the right way to evaluate it. And certainly God can measure each of our understandings, and some of us understand more than others. But God's understanding is immeasurable. He is all-knowing. And what does that look like? How else might we put that into words to try to describe? Here's a very good definition. It's not necessarily an easy one to understand. There we go. Even understanding God's understanding is hard. But it's a good definition by a theologian, Bernard Lonergan, said, God in a single intellectual intuition perfectly understands both himself and all other things. So he's got it there that it's not that God's knowledge, like ours, is assembled over time or something like that, or is just sensory. He encounters things and then comes to understand them. God understands things just you might say God essentially understands things. A single intellectual intuition. He has this understanding, and it's a perfect understanding of both himself and all other things. And that, of course, is really the measure of the infinity of God's knowledge, that God perfectly understands himself. We can't even perfectly understand the world around us that God has made. God understands not only the world he has made, but he perfectly understands himself, his own infinite glory. He's the only one who fully grasps God's infinite knowledge. And that has several implications, and one of the most important is in our matter of reverence, that we should revere the Lord in his knowledge and wisdom. Some of the worst twisting of the human relationship with God comes to some idea that we can teach the Almighty. Years ago, I read words by a highly placed individual in a certain Christian denomination, which I will not at this time name to protect the guilty. And this person was saying about an experience of teaching, and that at least open to the possibility that Abraham taught God something, that God learned from Abraham. That's, can we say blasphemous? God is the infinite and perfect and all-knowing one. He does not learn from us creatures. To think that in some way we can improve the knowledge and wisdom of the divine is surely to have a a profoundly and disastrously small view of God. And that plays into our whole reverence for God. That when we seem to think we know better than God, we are effectively saying this kind of thing that we can teach God. When we question God's justice or wisdom in the course of his action. We can ask questions, we can try to figure it out, but it's only proper if it's done in a tone of reverence. God, I don't understand how you, being so loving and good, would allow this to happen, or something like that. God, please give me wisdom, or at least peace. Help me to trust in your infinite wisdom. There can be a reverent probing of these mysteries, but when we pretend, you know, that a good and wise and loving God can't have done this or this, can't have allowed this or this, then we begin to think that we are above him. Well, there's the warning. There's the warning. But is this passage good for, does it have a, what we might call a more positive use? Is there an encouragement to find in this attribute of God in his knowledge and wisdom? Absolutely. Absolutely. God's infinite knowledge and wisdom. He is not instructed by anyone, but he is the one who knows all things. Um, that God is then the one we can trust in any and every situation. You go to Isaiah chapter 40 and read, "Have you not known? Have you not heard? The Lord is the everlasting God, the creator of the ends of the earth. He does not faint or grow weary. His understanding is unsearchable." So God's creative power and his strength are connected with his infinite understanding, his absolute knowledge and wisdom. And it goes on from there to say, "He gives power to the faint, and to him who has no might he increases strength. Even youths shall faint and be weary, and young men shall fall exhausted. But they who wait for the Lord shall renew their strength. They shall mount up with wings like eagles. They shall run and not be weary. They shall walk and not faint." Now that may emphasize God's strength more than his knowledge, but nonetheless, it all comes in this confluence of how the greatness of God is of the greatest assurance and comfort to his people. That God is the one who can lift up his children, that God is the one who can care for his own. The God who knows all things knows you perfectly, and he knows your situation perfectly. And he knows the struggles and challenges that you face today and that you will face tomorrow perfectly. And he already knows the way that he is going to provide for and redeem and comfort and care for his children. He knows the plan in its fullness. He knows how he's going to put all things right and bring about the promised new heavens and the new earth. He is never taken by surprise. He's never caught off guard. He is never unprepared for any situation because he knows what situations are going to come. Indeed, even this whole way is talking from our perspective. This whole idea of foreknowledge. We say God has all foreknowledge, and in a sense that's true, but it's true from our perspective, from God's perspective. He just knows it all. He's not limited by time, and neither is his knowledge limited by time. And so he is the absolute steady rock for his people who can rely on him in any and every circumstance because he knows what's going on and he knows how he's going to fix it. He knows the way of redemption for his children, and we can trust the all-knowing God. May the Lord comfort you in the thought of his absolute wisdom and knowledge, his perfect understanding, give you strength today. God bless you.